The most dangerous woman in the world was defined not by massive muscles or physical strength, but by the power she commanded. Her name was Qing Shi, and under her command were around 2,000 ships and tens of thousands of pirates. She went down in history as the Pirate Queen of the South China Sea. Under her control was an enormous pirate confederation. Not a single gang, but a fully structured system made up of several fleets, an entire organization with its own pirate laws. Her business goal was highly pragmatic: to control sea routes, collect passage fees, and effectively manage the region's trade flows. Historians estimate this force at hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of people, a scale comparable to a small state afloat on water. Even during her husband's lifetime, the pirates of southern China had united into a confederation of 6 fleets, distinguished by the colors of their flags. After his death, Qing Shi managed to keep this structure from falling apart. Her fleet controlled key sea passages through which Guangdong's trade moved. In practice, she blocked major highways on the water and imposed her own system of tolls and rules. Strict regulations on the distribution of loot, a ban on unauthorized actions, and harsh discipline were exactly what made the Confederation stable and manageable, rather than a loose collection of separate bands. Because of this level of organization, the authorities could not simply crush the problem by force for a long time. It was a mobile network of ships, bases, and people that quickly changed locations and continued to control the routes. However, internal tensions within the greatly expanded force of 17,000 people eventually led to the collapse of the Pirate Alliance. Qing Shi chose to make a deal with the authorities. Pirates who surrendered voluntarily were allowed to take up peaceful professions, and Qing Shi herself even managed to keep part of her property and begin a new legal life on shore. He wore grease paint, oversized shoes, and a bright red nose. On weekends, he cheered up sick kids in hospitals as Pogo the Clown. But once the makeup came off, John Wayne Gacy became something far more terrifying. What made him especially chilling wasn't just what he did, it was how normal he looked while doing it. In the 1970s, Gacy was a respected community figure in a Chicago suburb. He ran a successful construction business, hosted block parties, and even took photos with local politicians. But beneath his friendly smile was a man no one wanted to meet in a dark basement. Neighbors had no idea that under his modest home lay a horrifying secret, a crawl space that reeked of something foul. When police finally searched the property, they uncovered a hidden chamber filled with the remains of dozens of missing people. Gacy had lured many of them with job offers or promises of money. They never walked out again. It wasn't just the crimes that shocked the world, it was the way he kept up appearances. He was calm during interviews. He joked in court. He even sketched drawings of himself as Pogo from prison. People compared him to something out of a Stephen King novel or real-life Pennywise with a twisted double life. After his conviction, Gacy remained a haunting figure. He gave strange interviews, showed no sign of regret, and even tried to sell his artwork. His case became one of the most talked about in American history, inspiring documentaries, books, and even a few horror films. What makes Gacy unforgettable isn't just the number of lives he ended, it's the mask he wore while doing it. He turned the idea of a clown, a symbol of childhood joy, into something that now gives people nightmares. And despite his execution years ago, the name John Wayne Gacy still sends a chill through anyone who hears it. Because he didn't just look evil, he looked normal. He started as a petty thief, but inside the prison walls, Charles Bronson became something else entirely. A name that makes guards tense and inmates stay silent. If you ask anyone in the UK prison system who the most dangerous man is, most won't hesitate to say his name. Bronson wasn't always like this. Born Michael Peterson, he didn't begin with violent crime. But once he entered the system in the 1970s, he changed fast. Fights with officers, rooftop protests, hostage situations not once, not twice, but over a dozen times. He turned every prison he entered into his personal arena. In one infamous incident, he took an entire wing hostage over a disagreement about a prisoner's art supplies. Another time, he stripped down and smeared himself with butter before fighting multiple guards. It sounds like a movie scene, but it wasn't fiction. Bronson thrived in chaos. He spent more than 40 years in solitary confinement, not because of what he did outside prison, but because of what he did inside. Cell doors were reinforced when he arrived. Other inmates were moved. It wasn't just about keeping him in, it was about keeping everyone else safe. To some, he became a twisted legend. He took up painting, changed his name to Charles Bronson after the Hollywood actor, and called himself a prison celebrity. There were guards who refused to work his block and inmates who kept their distance without being told. That kind of fear doesn't come from rumors, it comes from history. In recent years, he's claimed to be calmer, focusing on art, meditation, and parole hopes. But even today, his name is still spoken carefully. In the UK's toughest prisons, Charles Bronson is more than a man. He's a storm that never quite passed. Pedro Lopez built his reputation across South America and in the shadows of prisons. And even today, his name still sends chills down the spine of guards and inmates alike. Imagine someone so dangerous, so unpredictable, that even men locked behind bars worry about him. He's called the Monster of the Andes, and though the official count stops in the hundreds, whispers in prison corridors claim it could be even more. While locked up, he earned a reputation that made everyone uneasy. Cellmates refused to share space, guards nervously checked their gear before entering his wing, and no one joked near his cell. Arrested in 1980, Lopez surprised everyone with his calm confession. But inside jail, that calm became alarming. He refused to participate in group routines. He would stare without blinking for minutes, making others uncomfortable. When brought to court, he appeared almost serene, icy calm that seemed only to boost the fear he carried. Prison authorities quietly moved him from one facility to the next, fearing retribution from other inmates or his unpredictable behavior. At one point, he vanished from public records entirely. Authorities released him, officially deemed rehabilitated, but rumors say that was a mistake. Somewhere out there, perhaps under a new name, he still walks the streets. His story inspired documentaries and crime shows in Latin America. Even the most hardened prison guards talk about him in low voices. It's not just what he did, it's the way he carried himself afterward, like a living ghost behind bars. And the fact that no one knows where he is now? That's enough to send a wave of paranoia through any cell block. Because when you've been inside with Pedro Lopez, you don't forget. Not his cold eyes, not the silence that followed him, not the rumors of what he might do if he ever slips through the system again. Richard Kuklinski didn't look like someone you'd avoid. He dressed clean, spoke in full sentences, and had a calm presence. But behind that calm was something terrifying. Inside the prison system, people didn't just know his name, they kept their distance. They called him the Iceman, not because of any dramatic nickname he made up, but because of how he stored the people he targeted frozen, hidden, erased. Before he landed behind bars, Kuklinski moved quietly through cities, blending in. He was a family man on the surface, but when he talked about what he did, his voice didn't shake once. In prison, it wasn't the things he said that unnerved people. It was how casually he said them. He described things with the same tone others use when they talk about lunch. Some inmates talk tough. Kuklinski didn't have to. Everyone already knew. He wasn't loud, didn't cause chaos, didn't pick fights, but guards didn't relax around him. Some kept their keys tighter when walking past. Others requested not to work his block. It wasn't because he acted out, it was because he didn't need to. His reputation did the talking. Kuklinski once said he didn't lose sleep over anything he had done. And it showed. His interviews became viral long before social media existed. People were fascinated by how cold he was, how polite and horrifying could live in the same sentence. He spent the rest of his life locked up, but even from inside, he left an impression. Documentaries, books, and even Hollywood couldn't ignore him. He was the kind of prisoner no one wanted to be near, not because he was loud or wild, but because he was quiet. Too quiet. In a place where many talk tough, Kuklinski didn't need to raise his voice. Everyone just stepped back. Thomas Silverstein became infamous inside the prison system long before leaving home. Convicted in the late 1970s, he ended up in the most secure U.S. prisons. But it wasn't the walls that made him notorious. It was the fear he inspired behind them. Silverstein was convicted of killing a fellow inmate during a riot. But what shook the system wasn't just the murder, it was what came next. He carried out more violent acts inside prison, became prisoner, and guard worst nightmare. Officials said interrogation or confrontation could trigger another incident, so most avoided his cell block as if it carried its own gravity. He spent decades in total isolation. No cellmates, no common areas, no meaningful contact with guards. His cell was reinforced, his range severely restricted. People whispered he didn't need elaborate plans, just the right moment. His name alone made others tense. Some guards refused duties involving him, fearing something unpredictable might happen. They claimed it wasn't acting out. It was the silence that made Silverstein menacing. Even in solitary, he communicated stories of violence that were dispassionate, almost clinical. When movies or books mentioned serial killers or isolated convicts, Silverstein was a benchmark. His voice, though rarely heard by public, echoed through prison lore. In the end, he lived and died in near total separation. Not because he begged for it, but because everyone else did. His case raised questions about the limits of punishment and how the mere idea of one man can reshape an entire system. Aileen Wuornos walked into prison already infamous, the rare female serial killer who confessed she'd kill again. But it wasn't just her crimes that made waves inside prison, it was her presence, and the way guards reacted when her name was mentioned. Unlike many high-profile inmates, she didn't howl or rage. Her reputation came from the force of her words. She spoke bluntly, "I'm not sorry." That kind of admission made officials uneasy. They wondered, what happens when someone unafraid to die slips through their walls? She stirred unsettling tensions among both inmates and guards. Some claimed she held an icy stare. Others said they heard her reciting lines like dialogue from a TV crime drama late at night. There were guards who asked for reassignment rather than face occasional unpredictability. It wasn't loud outbursts. They were isolated moments of intensity, of cold determination. Still, she made the most of her time. She studied, did legal research, and even posed for limited interviews. But underneath, there was a constant undercurrent. The woman who'd said she'd kill again was locked behind bars, and that never faded into the background. She received life sentences, spent years in Miami-Dade, and became a figure in documentaries and pop culture. You might recognize her from the film Monster, starring Charlize Theron. But beyond the screenplay, the real-world version was terrifying in her conviction. Inside prison, some said she never blended in. She was a reminder that murderers don't always follow a script. Aileen Wuornos showed that fear can come from the words someone uses all by themselves. In the world of high-security prisons, there's an unspoken rule. No one escapes twice. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman broke that rule. And when his name appeared on a prison transfer list, tension followed. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was a puzzle no one could solve for long. He was first caught in the early 1990s. The prison was confident. Cameras, towers, isolation. Still, he vanished, reportedly with help and a laundry cart. Years later, when he was caught again, security was dialed up. A top-level facility, reinforced walls, non-stop surveillance. It didn't matter. He vanished again. This time through a tunnel dug with military-level precision, leading from his cell's shower floor to the outside world. Inside, officials began doubting even the strongest cells. Some guards were transferred, some questioned, others quietly reassigned. No one wanted to be the next on duty if a wall cracked or a floor gave way. When he was finally extradited, flown out, and locked in a U.S. facility, the prison changed routines. Guards rotated, cameras monitored 24/7, even his sleep was checked every 15 minutes. Other inmates never interacted with him. He was kept far from anyone who might pass a message or receive one. Not because he caused chaos, but because even the whisper of a message could trigger a chain of events beyond the bars. El Chapo didn't need to be loud. His escapes did all the talking. In a system built to contain the worst, his presence alone rewrote security procedures. Most prisoners fear escape attempts will earn them more time. El Chapo proved some don't fear walls at all. He stood 6'9" and weighed over 250 pounds. But Edmund Kemper didn't need size to intimidate. His intelligence did that for him. Most inmates talk too much. Kemper spoke carefully, and when he did, everyone listened. He committed his crimes in silence. No grand chases, no loud scenes. When it was all over, he calmly picked up the phone and turned himself in. That calm never left. Behind bars, guards noticed something different. He followed rules. He kept his space clean. And yet there was something off. He wasn't trying to stay out of trouble. He was simply watching everyone else. Some called him the gentle giant. Others avoided speaking to him entirely. It wasn't just his past, it was how aware he was. He remembered faces, patterns, behaviors. Even in prison interviews, he broke down psychology like a professor. He became known for helping the FBI profile other violent criminals. But some guards wondered, was that helpful or just another way for him to stay ahead of everyone? He didn't need to fight to keep his space. People didn't line up to get close. Even decades later, he remains in a California medical prison, quiet, still towering, still analyzing, still watched more closely than most. Kemper wasn't just feared because of what he did, but because no one was ever sure what he was thinking. And in prison, that kind of silence is more unsettling than noise. He smiled, flirted, and delivered smooth one-liners on national television. In the late 1970s, Rodney Alcala appeared on The Dating Game and won. Viewers saw a confident, good-looking man with a charming attitude. What they didn't see was the darkness waiting off camera. Behind that grin was a dangerous manipulator. Even before his game show appearance, Alcala had already been in trouble more than once. But somehow he kept slipping through the cracks. He studied fine arts, acted like a normal guy, and often carried a camera. He liked to say he was a photographer, but what was on those film rolls told a very different story. When he finally ended up in prison, the atmosphere changed. Even inside, Alcala stood out, not just for his crimes, but for how calm he was about them. He didn't shout, didn't brag. He acted like someone who didn't fully belong behind bars, until you heard the details. Other inmates kept their distance. Some described him as intense without raising his voice. Guards treated him like a person who understood more than he let on. His intelligence wasn't in question, neither was the fear he created around him. People didn't argue with Alcala, they walked the long way around his cell. His photo collection, discovered after his arrest, sent shockwaves through investigators. Thousands of photos, many still unidentified. That quiet obsession with image and control never stopped even in prison. Alcala wrote legal briefs, challenged the system, and seemed to enjoy every moment he stayed in the spotlight. His calmness, his sharp memory, his complete lack of emotion, it all made him unsettling. Not loud, not aggressive, just always calculating. And in the prison system, where reputation spreads fast, that made him one of the most quietly feared men behind bars. Some prisoners fake remorse. Carl Panzram didn't bother. From the moment he entered the system, he made one thing clear. He hated everything and everyone, including himself. And he didn't care who knew it. Panzram wasn't known for subtlety. He admitted to everything without flinching. Guards didn't have to guess what he was capable of, he told them straight to their faces. And when he was locked up, no one questioned the decision. If anything, they wondered if steel bars were enough. Inside, he was a storm. He resisted authority at every turn, sabotaged cell doors, and constantly tried to provoke conflict. But what truly terrified the people around him wasn't the violence. It was the complete lack of hesitation. There was no warm-up, no warning signs, just action. Fellow inmates gave him space, not because he was the biggest, but because he didn't play games. Panzram wasn't interested in alliances, protection, or keeping his head down. He didn't fear punishment, and that made him unpredictable. One wrong word could turn into something serious, and everyone knew it. He was transferred more than once because no facility could handle him for long. He saw prisons not as systems to be avoided, but as cages to be rattled. When solitary confinement became routine, he didn't complain. He welcomed it. At one point, he wrote a full confession detailing every violent act, not to apologize, just to let people know. His final words before execution were just as defiant, with no signs of regret or fear. He remained consistent to the very end. In prison folklore, some names are whispered. Carl Panzram is one of them. Not because he yelled the loudest, but because no one could ever tell what he might do next. And in a place where control is everything, that's what made him truly dangerous. Robert Maudsley doesn't need to raise his voice. In the British prison system, his silence says enough. Guards don't treat him like a regular inmate, they treat him like a warning. Even now, decades later, he's held in a custom-built cell made from bulletproof glass and steel. Not for escape, but to keep everyone else safe. He didn't gain notoriety for what he did on the outside. What made him infamous happened behind locked doors. Maudsley killed fellow inmates. Not out of panic, not out of rage, with calm precision. Twice. After the first killing, he was transferred to a high-security facility. But even there, it wasn't enough. He managed to take 2 more inmates out in a single day. The prison went into lockdown. Procedures changed. From then on, Robert Maudsley was considered untouchable. Since then, he's spent most of his life in solitary. His custom cell at Wakefield Prison has been described by the press as a glass box, echoing the kind of containment you'd expect from a movie villain. He eats alone, sleeps alone, speaks to no one unless required. The design isn't dramatic, it's practical. It's what the system decided was necessary. Among prison staff, his name is handled carefully. Inmates rarely speak of him. There's no gang, no group, no crew. Just one man who moves so quietly, so efficiently, that the system couldn't take a single chance. He's become a myth within the walls. Some compare him to Hannibal Lecter, but without the flair, just the results. Cold, methodical, unchanging. When someone asks who the most feared inmate in Britain is, the answer is often immediate: Robert Maudsley, and it has been for decades. Few criminals have unsettled the world quite like Issei Sagawa. His case made headlines not just for what he did, but for what happened after. Unlike others on this list, he didn't spend decades behind bars. In fact, he walked free, and that's what made him so unnerving to everyone around him. Sagawa was arrested in Paris in the early 1980s. He confessed to everything. The crime shocked investigators, but what came after was even more disturbing. After being declared legally unfit to stand trial in France, he was deported to Japan. But Japanese authorities couldn't hold him due to legal complications. In the end, he was released. The public couldn't believe it. A man openly admitting to one of the most horrifying acts imaginable was now living in a Tokyo suburb, giving interviews, writing books, and even reviewing restaurants. People avoided him in the street. Neighbors moved away. And yet, he continued to live in plain sight. Though technically free, Sagawa became a ghost of his own story. He was isolated not by bars, but by fear. In everyday places, his presence made people uncomfortable. The calmness in his voice, the detail in his writing, the way he described everything without emotion, it all added to the discomfort. He didn't seem to regret what he did. He only regretted that he wasn't allowed to do it again. Even in media appearances, producers kept their distance. Interviews were awkward. Studios brought security. No one wanted to be left alone with him. He didn't threaten. He didn't act out. But his very presence was enough. He passed away in 2022, alone, physically weakened and largely forgotten by mainstream media. But among true crime circles and among those who followed his case closely, his story remains one of the most unsettling examples of someone the system simply couldn't contain. And even when he wasn't behind bars, most people still treated him like he was, for good reason. Richard Phillips spent more time in prison than anyone else in American history who was proven innocent 45 years. That's longer than the Beatles have existed, and he never even saw it coming. Back in 1971, Detroit was already a city wrapped in tension. Richard was just 25, painting houses to get by. Out of nowhere, police knocked on his door. They said he was being charged with murder. He was stunned. He didn't even know the victim. But a man named Fred Mitchell told police Richard had helped him carry out a robbery that ended in death. What the jury didn't know was that Mitchell had cut a deal to avoid a life sentence. He gave up Richard falsely just to save himself. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no physical evidence tying Richard to the crime. All the case had was one man's word. But that was enough. Richard was sentenced to life without parole and vanished into the prison system just like that. He spent decades behind bars, years rolled into decades. He didn't see the fall of the Berlin Wall. He missed the internet boom. He missed his family growing old without him. But what makes Richard different is what he did with all that time. He didn't give up. He painted hundreds of vivid works filled with hope, color, and life. He said painting was what kept him sane. In 2014, a student working with the University of Michigan's Innocence Clinic discovered the key detail that changed everything Fred Mitchell had lied. The truth had been buried in files no one ever checked. A different man had already confessed to the killing, and Richard had never even been at the scene. In 2018, Richard finally walked free. He was 73. He stepped out into a world filled with smartphones, electric cars, and people who had never even heard of his name. But instead of bitterness, he brought his art. His paintings now hang in galleries, his story told beside each canvas. He even donated some of the profits to help other innocent people still behind bars. What's wild is that no one ever apologized on behalf of the system that failed him, and he never let that define him. As he once said, freedom is the most beautiful word in the English language, and after 45 years, he finally got to say it for himself. Andrew White was just 26 when his life stopped cold. In 1982, he was arrested in Manchester for the murder of Lorna Bates, a young woman found in a wooded area near his home. There was no hard evidence, just one person who said they'd seen someone similar nearby. That was enough for police to bring him in. He spent hours being interrogated alone, sleep-deprived, and starving. He later said they promised he could go home if he just admitted it. Under pressure, he broke. That so-called confession became the cornerstone of a case with no DNA, no fingerprints, and no real witnesses. The trial was quick. 2 weeks later, the jury heard about his confession and gave a guilty verdict. Appeals failed. The system saw no reason to question how those words were obtained. White was sentenced to life. Decades passed in silence. Andrew filed appeals, wrote to human rights groups, even reached out to the European Court, all ignored. It wasn't until 2019, when Innocence UK took up his case, that something changed. Hidden in an old police archive, they found a jacket from the crime scene that had never been tested. Modern DNA analysis proved what Andrew had always said: he wasn't there. The traces matched another man, Paul Henderson, already in prison for similar crimes. Henderson had lived near the scene and knew details never made public. In 2021, after 38 years, Andrew walked free. He was 65. His mother had died the year before, never knowing he was innocent. He had no home, no family left, just freedom. Today, he lives in Manchester, learning how to use a smartphone, searching for words on Google, and figuring out how to exist in a world that moved on without him. "It's scary and inspiring," he said, "but I'm alive. And now, no one can take that away." In 1984, Darrell Hunt was just 19 when his photo hit the headlines in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. A young newspaper copy editor had been found murdered, and police were under pressure to solve the case. Hunt, a black man, quickly became their focus despite zero physical evidence and no motive. He was convicted based on the testimony of shaky witnesses and a confession that was never even recorded. For years, Darrell sat in prison for something he didn't do, while the real perpetrator remained free. Even when early DNA testing ruled him out, prosecutors insisted it didn't prove anything. It wasn't until 2004, nearly 2 decades later, that a more advanced DNA test identified the real attacker, a man named Willard Brown, who eventually confessed. Darrell was freed the following year. When he stepped out of prison, he didn't scream or rage. He became a voice. He traveled the country speaking about justice, forgiveness, and broken systems. "You can't get justice," he once said, "if you're invisible." Darrell Hunt didn't just regain his freedom, he gave others a reason to believe they might too. So Thomas Raynor James didn't fit the profile. Back in 1990, he was arrested in Miami for a murder that happened during a home robbery. The only problem? The real suspect had the exact same name, and honestly, no one in the system seemed to care enough to double-check. There was zero forensic evidence tying Thomas to the crime. But, a lineup ended up confusing the witnesses, and they picked him just because he shared the name of the man they were actually looking for. Even when Thomas insisted he'd never set foot in that apartment complex, he was convicted and sentenced to life. For years, he filed appeal after appeal. But it wasn't until 2021 that a Florida journalist stumbled on his case and started digging. What she found was just wild documents showing that police had been warned early on that they had the wrong man. In April 2022, after 32 years in prison, Thomas was finally exonerated. In interviews, he never lashed out. "I knew I was innocent," he said. "I just didn't know if anyone else would ever care. It was a clerical mistake, a name error, the kind of thing that should have been fixed in minutes. Instead, it stole a lifetime." Anthony Ray Hinton was working in a warehouse in Alabama when he got arrested back in 1985. Police said he'd committed 2 murders during separate robberies. Their proof? A revolver found in his mother's house, never mind that it hadn't been fired in years. The state's whole case rested entirely on these so-called ballistic experts. They claimed the bullets from the crime scene matched the old gun. Anthony, who had never even been arrested before, was convicted and sentenced to death. For 30 years, he sat on death row, alone in a 5-by-7-foot cell. For the first 15 years, nobody listened. But when the Equal Justice Initiative took over his case, they brought in top forensic experts who all agreed the bullets couldn't have come from that gun, not even close. In 2015, the Supreme Court finally ordered his release. He walked out smiling, arms stretched wide, and said, "The sun does shine." He later wrote a book by that name. And that book, a story of survival, humor, and hope, has become required reading in schools across the country. Anthony's case shows how one faulty opinion, one lazy test, can nearly kill an innocent man. And still, he forgave. Hate, he says, doesn't get you out of prison. Love does. Carlos de Luna was just 20 years old when he was arrested in Corpus Christi, Texas, for the murder of a gas station clerk in 1983. He said he was innocent, said the real killer was another man, Carlos Hernandez, who not only had a history of violent crimes, but had actually bragged to people about getting away with this very murder. But police didn't bother looking for Hernandez. They had de Luna, and that was enough. The case against him was honestly paper thin. No blood, no fingerprints, no murder weapon. The only evidence was a shaky eyewitness ID made in the dark. Yet DeLuna was sentenced to death in less than a year. He was executed in 1989, still insisting they had the wrong man. It wasn't until decades later that journalists from Columbia University took a closer look and uncovered piles of missed leads, including proof that Hernandez had confessed to multiple people and had a long rap sheet that somehow never made it into court. The investigation became the subject of books, documentaries, and headlines. It's now considered one of the clearest examples of a wrongful execution in U.S. history. DeLuna didn't live to see the truth come out, but his case helped fuel a wave of doubt about capital punishment that continues to grow today. Ronnie Long spent more time behind bars than some people spend on Earth before they retire. In 1976, he was convicted of a crime he didn't commit in Concord, North Carolina, and he stayed in prison for 44 years. There was no physical evidence tying him to the crime. In fact, much of the evidence collected fingerprints, hair samples, and even semen all pointed away from him. But none of it made it to the defense. The jury never heard about any of it. Ronnie was black, the jury was all white, and the police were under pressure. That combination led to one of the longest-running injustices in modern American legal history. Decade after decade, Ronnie filed appeals. He never confessed, never stopped fighting, even when parole boards told him to show remorse to have a shot at freedom, but he wouldn't say sorry for something he didn't do. Then in 2020, a federal court finally admitted what should have been obvious evidence had been hidden. His trial was unfair and justice had been denied. Ronnie was released after 16,000 days in prison. When he stepped out, he was nearly 65 and the world was a different place. He married his longtime partner who had stood by him for years. He smiled, laughed, and went for a walk without fences for the first time in 4 decades. Asked what freedom felt like, he paused and said, "It feels like being seen." In 1989, 5 teenagers from Harlem Corey Wise, Kevin Richardson, Yusef Salaam, Raymond Santana, and Antron McCrae were arrested for an assault that shook New York City. A jogger had been found unconscious in Central Park, and within hours the police pinned it on the nearest group of Black and Latino teens in the area. What followed is now considered one of the most infamous wrongful convictions in modern history. All 5 boys were between 14 and 16 years old. They were interrogated alone for hours without lawyers or their parents. They were scared. They didn't understand the system. And under that pressure, they gave in. Coerced confessions were taped, filled with contradictions and missing facts, but that didn't matter. Prosecutors ran with them anyway. There was no physical evidence connecting the boys to the crime. Their stories didn't match. DNA from the scene didn't belong to any of them. But the city needed someone to blame. The media called them a wolf pack. Headlines painted them as monsters, and juries believed the narrative. All 5 were convicted. They served between 6 and 13 years before the truth finally came out. In 2002, a man named Matias Reyes, already serving a life sentence, confessed to the attack. His DNA was a perfect match, and his story fit every detail the boys never could have known. The convictions were vacated. The city paid a $41 million settlement. The story became a documentary, then a Netflix series, When They See Us. And for many, it was the first time they understood just how easily innocence can be crushed by fear, pressure, and a system in a hurry to punish. Today, the 5 men speak publicly, write books, and advocate for justice reform. What happened to them wasn't just a failure, it was a spotlight on how fast things can go wrong when power, prejudice, and panic collide. Dewey Buzzella spent 26 years locked up for a murder he didn't commit, and when he got out, the first thing he did was win a boxing match. At 52 years old. In 1983, Buzzella was arrested for the killing of an elderly woman in Poughkeepsie, New York. The case had gone unsolved for years until police pulled in Buzzella, a local with a few juvenile run-ins but no violent history. The evidence? None. Just 2 jailhouse informants who claimed Buzzella had confessed. Those same men later admitted they lied to get lighter sentences for themselves. Even though fingerprints at the crime scene didn't match Buzzella, and even though key documents that could have cleared him were hidden, the jury convicted him, and he was sent away. In prison, Dewey didn't give up. He earned a college degree, mentored younger inmates, and trained in boxing, a sport he loved since childhood. His dream? One real professional fight. He kept refusing parole because it required him to admit guilt. "I'd rather die in prison," he said, "than say I'm guilty for something I didn't do." Finally, in 2009, the Innocence Project uncovered the hidden evidence, including witness statements and official reports that proved someone else was likely responsible. Dewey was exonerated and released. 2 years later, in front of thousands, he stepped into the ring for his first and only pro boxing match. He won by unanimous decision. Dewey's story isn't just about injustice, it's about grit, discipline, and refusing to let the world define you. When he left the ring, he raised his gloves high and said, "This is the greatest night of my life." And you could feel that it wasn't just about boxing. It was about finally being seen for who he really was. Ricky Jackson was just 18 when his life was stolen. Back in 1975, a businessman was killed in broad daylight in Cleveland, Ohio. Police scrambled for answers, and they'd landed on Ricky along with his 2 friends, Wiley and Kwame Ajamu. All of them were black teens. None of them had anything to do with the crime. The case against Ricky rested entirely on one thing: the testimony of a 12-year-old paperboy. That boy said he saw Ricky commit the murder. What no one asked or cared to find out was that the kid was half a block away, watching from behind a bus windshield in the rain. There were no fingerprints, no weapon, no physical evidence. Just the words of a scared kid under pressure from detectives. Ricky was sentenced to death. He spent years on death row until Ohio ended the practice for cases like his, and his sentence was changed to life. But the walls didn't move. He stayed in prison for nearly 4 decades. Then in 2011, the unbelievable happened. The same man, now in his 40s, came forward and admitted he lied. He said police had threatened to arrest his parents if he didn't name someone. He said he'd carried the guilt for decades. That confession broke the case open. By 2014, Ricky was exonerated. After 39 years in prison, he walked out into a world that barely looked the same. Cell phones, the internet, digital, everything, it was all new. But his attitude? Unshaken. "I don't hate the kid," he said. "He was just a kid. But the adults, they knew better." Ricky now speaks at schools and justice events. His calmness, his clarity, and his refusal to let anger shape his future make his story unforgettable. Of all the wrongful convictions in American history, his remains one of the longest, and one of the clearest reminders of how fragile truth can be, especially when adults let pressure speak louder than facts. On the morning of his first day of senior year, 17-year-old Marty Tankleff found his mother dead and his father barely alive in their Long Island home. He did what anyone would do. He called 911, tried to help, waited for answers. But within hours, police decided Marty had done it. They told him his father had died a lie and pushed until the teenager started to doubt himself. They said maybe he had blacked out. Maybe he didn't remember doing it. Under pressure, Marty said things that sounded like confessions but weren't. Still, it was enough. He was charged with double murder. At trial, prosecutors painted him as a rich, spoiled kid who snapped. They ignored other suspects, including a business partner of Marty's father, who owed him a lot of money. The jury convicted him. Marty was sentenced to 50 years to life. But Marty refused to fade. From prison, he researched law, wrote letters, found allies. Over time, private investigators dug up bombshells, witnesses who said other men confessed, details pointing straight to that business partner, and proof that Marty's so-called confession had been manipulated. In 2007, his conviction was overturned. 17 years after his arrest, he walked free. Later, prosecutors admitted the case had been flawed from day one. Marty didn't just leave prison, he turned into a legal advocate. He went to law school, graduated, and now fights for people in the same spot he once was. His case has been studied in universities and even referenced in legal dramas. Because it's more than just a miscarriage of justice, it's a story of a kid who was punished for trusting the police. Kevin Strickland had never even been to the crime scene. But in 1979, that didn't matter. He was convicted of a triple murder in Kansas City, Missouri, based almost entirely on the word of one witness. That witness later recanted, saying she had been pressured by police. But the damage was done. Kevin was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for 50 years. He always said he was at home watching TV when the murders happened. No physical evidence ever connected him to the crime. The fingerprints, the gun, all pointed elsewhere. Still, he sat in prison year after year, ignored by a system unwilling to admit a mistake. The state's own prosecutors eventually came forward, saying Kevin was innocent. The original investigators, even the judge who sentenced him, later agreed. But the Missouri Attorney General continued to fight his release, arguing that new evidence wasn't enough. It took a public spotlight, national media coverage, millions of petition signatures, and a push from the Midwest Innocence Project to finally tip the scale. In 2021, a judge ruled that Kevin had been wrongfully convicted. He was released after 43 years behind bars. Kevin was 62 when he walked free. He had never owned a cell phone, never seen the internet. He received no immediate compensation from the state. But his calm demeanor and quiet strength made headlines. "They robbed me of my life," he said, "but I'm not going to let them take my soul." His case exposed just how long the truth can be buried and how slow justice can crawl even when the facts are crystal clear. Craig Coley's story began on Veterans Day, back in 1978, when police in Simi Valley, California, responded to a pretty gruesome crime. A young woman and her 11-year-old son had been found dead in their apartment. Craig, the woman's ex-boyfriend, was quickly named the suspect and, well, everything spiraled from there. There was no physical evidence tying him to the scene. In fact, neighbors actually gave him an alibi, but detectives were convinced they had their man. They ignored leads, dismissed witnesses, and even destroyed key evidence before it could be tested. Craig was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. He spent nearly 4 decades locked away, maintaining his innocence the entire time. His case might have stayed buried if not for one determined police chief who decided to reopen it in 2015. The results were honestly shocking. New DNA tests found someone else's biological material on the bedsheets. A re-examination of the scene showed there was just no way Craig could have done what he was accused of. Witnesses who had been dismissed early on were finally heard, and everything pointed to a different, unknown suspect. In 2017, California's governor issued a full pardon. Craig walked free after 39 years behind bars, older, quieter, but still standing. He later received $21 million in compensation, one of the largest settlements of its kind. What makes Craig's case especially haunting is how easily it could have been avoided. The real evidence was there all along, someone just had to care enough to look at it. Paul Blackburn was only 15 when he was pulled into a police station in Manchester, England, and accused of trying to kill a younger boy. Scared and alone, he was interrogated for hours without a lawyer or parent present. Eventually, police said he confessed, but there was no recording, just typed notes written by officers who wanted the case closed fast. The victim, who survived the attack, had already told police that Paul didn't match the attacker's voice or appearance. Still, the so-called confession outweighed everything. Paul was convicted and sentenced to life. In prison, he became invisible. He grew into adulthood behind bars. He missed his entire 20s. And through it all, he insisted he hadn't done it. His pleas were ignored for decades until a fresh legal review finally took a hard look at how the confession was obtained. The findings were brutal. Paul's rights had been violated. The police interviews were manipulative, and the so-called evidence was flawed. In 2005, his conviction was thrown out. Paul walked free after 25 years, having gone in as a child and come out as a man who barely knew the outside world. He's since rebuilt a quiet life, mostly out of the public eye. But his story remains a chilling example of how fast a system can flip on a teenager, especially when no one's watching. Joe Arity was 23 when he was executed in Colorado back in 1939. He had an IQ of 46, loved toy trains, and didn't really understand what death row meant. He smiled all the time, even on the day he was led to the gas chamber. Joe had been accused of a terrible crime, one he couldn't have committed. He wasn't even in town when it happened, but his disability made him an easy target. He was interrogated for hours until he said what the police wanted to hear. No evidence, no real defense, just a quick trial and a guilty verdict. Even the prison warden begged for mercy, calling Joe the happiest man I've ever known. But no one listened. In 2011, more than 70 years later, Colorado's governor posthumously pardoned him. Too late to save him, but not too late to say the system got it wrong. Joe's story is short, sad, and unforgettable. He didn't understand why he was in prison, but the world now understands why he should never have been there at all. What do you picture when you hear someone lifted a car? A team of bodybuilders? Maybe a superhero moment in a movie? Now scrap that, because one man actually balanced an entire car on his head. His name is John Evans, and what he did defies every expectation about strength, balance, and honestly, human skulls. Evans, a retired construction worker from the UK, became famous for breaking records by balancing massive objects on top of his head. But nothing compares to what he pulled off in 1999 when he supported a Mini Cooper, specially modified but still weighing in at over 350 pounds, for 33 full seconds. on a small square pad placed on his bare head. No tricks, no wires, just his legs, his neck, and a head of steel. What makes this record even more mind-blowing is the shape of the human body. Balancing something even half that weight on your back would be insane, but your head? It's small, it's round, it moves. And yet Evans somehow kept that car steady like it was a stack of books. Not just that, he was in his 50s when he did it. Most of us are worried about a sore neck after a nap. Evans took that to a different universe. To this day, no one has been able to repeat that stunt. Even professional strongmen avoid it. Why? Because it's not just about muscle. It's about precision, balance, and a pain threshold most people can't even comprehend. Lifting weights? Common. Pulling trucks? Impressive. But putting a car on your head and standing tall like it's no big deal? That's record-breaking insanity. It's the kind of feat that makes you question the limits of the human body. John Evans didn't just bend the rules, he headbutted them right into the record books. This record pulls more than just attention. It literally pulls a person into the air. Layla Noon, a trained circus artist from the United States, defied gravity and every hairstylist's advice when she set the record for the longest time suspended by her hair. For over 25 minutes, she was lifted off the ground, spinning slowly under the lights, held up only by a single tightly bound ponytail. Now, this isn't a magic trick or a special harness hidden in her costume. Her full body weight was supported only by her scalp. That's not just physical endurance, it's iron discipline and a bizarre kind of calm. The pressure, the discomfort, the tension in every follicle. Most people wouldn't last a few seconds. The most fascinating part? She was completely composed throughout the performance, turning an almost medieval-sounding stunt into something beautiful. Hair suspension has been part of circus culture for centuries, but Nooney took it to the next level, breaking the previous record by nearly 2 full minutes. That kind of resilience is rarely seen outside of elite athletes or ancient monks. And no, she didn't lose her hair afterward. In fact, she walked off the stage smiling. You can't train for this in a gym. You train it in your nerves, your spine, and probably your soul. Some records are about pushing boundaries, and others are about never cutting them. Literally. Lee Redmond, a woman from Utah, holds the world record for the longest fingernails ever grown on a single hand, measuring a combined length of over 28 feet. That's about the length of a small RV hanging off her fingers. She started growing them in the late 70s and kept them intact for decades, shaping and polishing them daily. They curled like spirals, forming a tangled web of keratin that made everyday life a massive challenge. Opening doors, tying shoelaces, driving, it all required custom methods and serious patience. But here's the wildest part, she didn't grow them for attention or fame. It was personal discipline, a choice. She treated it like a living sculpture. Over the years, her nails became part of her identity, attracting headlines, interviews, and endless questions about how she manages day-to-day life. While some may find it bizarre, it's also oddly impressive. It's not strength or speed, it's commitment over decades, without shortcuts. Nobody has come close to matching it since. It sounds silly until you try it. Manoj Kumar Maharana from India holds one of the weirdest and most unforgettable records ever, fitting 459 drinking straws into his mouth. At once. No rubber bands, no tape. Just pure cheek-stretching dedication. This isn't just shoving straws in randomly. Every single one had to stay in for a certain amount of time without falling. It took careful placement, incredible breath control, and the kind of jaw flexibility that would make a cartoon character jealous. To prepare, Maharana practiced for months, expanding the size of his jaw muscles slowly and carefully. He even trained his facial muscles to stay clenched while holding a ridiculous amount of weight. It's part science, part spectacle, and all madness. Why would anyone do this? Because it's unforgettable. Strange, yes, but incredibly hard to beat. It looks funny on the surface, but underneath is serious endurance and control. No one has topped his number yet, and just thinking about how uncomfortable it must have been is enough to make your cheeks ache. Some people are lucky, others are lucky and unlucky at the same time. Roy Sullivan, a park ranger in the United States, was struck by lightning 7 times in his life and survived every single one of them. Yes, 7, and each one was documented. He wasn't a storm chaser. He didn't hike into thunderstorms for fun. He just happened to be in the wrong place again and again over decades. Once while fishing, another time while driving. One strike even blew off his shoe. His hat got destroyed. His eyebrows were burned. And still, he lived through them all. Statistically, this should be impossible. Experts calculated the odds of it happening to one person at 1 in several billion. His co-workers started calling him the human lightning rod. But Roy didn't take it as a curse. He treated it like part of the job, even laughing about it later in interviews. Nobody has matched this record, and honestly, nobody wants to. It's the kind of record that earns respect from weather scientists, survival experts, and anyone who's ever ducked under a tree during a storm. Roy Sullivan didn't just beat the odds, he electrified them. Lady Luck smiled wide on Patricia DeMoro one night in Atlantic City, and just refused to stop. She stepped up to the craps table, picked up the dice, and rolled them 154 times in a row without losing. No mistakes, no snake eyes, no 7-out. Just pure mind-bending momentum. To anyone who's played craps, this sounds impossible. A typical hot hand might last a dozen rolls, maybe 20. But DeMoro's streak lasted over 4 hours, making it the longest documented dice roll streak in a live casino setting. The crowd around her grew massive, the atmosphere electric, and dealers had to rotate out as she just kept rolling. Statisticians calculated the odds of this streak being over 1 in 5.6 billion. That's rarer than winning some lotteries. And yet, she did it, without tricks, without previous professional gambling experience. Just focus, rhythm, and an unbelievable run of luck. What makes it even crazier? She only rolled the dice. She didn't even place a bet on most of the rolls. DeMoro walked away with a memory instead of a fortune. And no one, not even the most seasoned gamblers, has touched that record since. When most people break one world record, they frame the certificate and call it a lifetime achievement. Ashrita Furman had other plans. He's broken over 600 records in total and currently holds more than 130 active ones. From slicing apples mid-jump on a pogo stick to walking the fastest mile while balancing a bottle on his head, Furman turns almost anything into a challenge. He's not a pro athlete. He's not a magician. He just trains like a man on a mission because he is. His goal? To prove that any regular person can achieve something amazing with enough focus and practice. His records span categories that most people wouldn't even think to try. Longest underwater cycling. Most grapes caught in the mouth. Fastest mile while juggling. It's like watching a live-action cartoon character turn reality into a game. And while others may occasionally take over one of his titles, he just finds a new goal and breaks another. At this point, it's fair to say Furman doesn't just hold the most records. He practically invented the idea of living for world records. When the director calls action and the sky is literally on fire, you're probably watching Mission Impossible. During the making of the latest installment, Tom Cruise took things to a new extreme, jumping from an aircraft 16 times with his parachute on fire. These weren't just digital effects, the fire was real, controlled through special gel and safety teams, but the risk? Still massive. Cruise trained for months to handle the heat, weight, and wind resistance. And he did every single jump himself. Each time he leapt from a military-style aircraft, free fell, deployed the chute, and floated down through live flames. 16 times, no stunt double. That's now the official record for the most burning parachute jumps by a single person, and unsurprisingly, no one else is rushing to beat it. It's the kind of stunt that doesn't just break records, it burns them into movie history. Between the fire, the altitude, and the sheer danger, this feat feels more like a video game level than real life. But it happened, and it's officially in the books. Most people can hold their breath for a minute or two. With training, maybe 4 or 5. But Budimir Šobat, a freediver from Croatia, did what feels like science fiction. He stayed underwater for 24 minutes and 37 seconds without surfacing. Before the attempt, Šobat used pure oxygen to saturate his lungs and bloodstream, a legal technique for static apnea records. Then he slipped into the water, slowed his heart rate to a crawl, and stayed motionless. No panic, no flinching, just calm, deep focus. It's a feat that demands not just lung capacity, but absolute control over your body and mind. Your brain starts sounding alarms after just a few minutes without fresh air. Šobat had to quiet that instinct, keep his muscles still, and maintain near meditative stillness. And yes, he was monitored by medics the entire time, but the record was real, confirmed, and jaw-dropping. No one has gone further since. It's not just about breath. This is about pushing the body to the edge of what's humanly possible, and then going one step beyond. Building a tower out of dominoes is already tough. One bump, one sneeze, one wrong move, and it all collapses. Now try stacking them 33 feet high. That's exactly what a team led by Lily Havesh, one of the most famous domino artists online, accomplished in a jaw-dropping record attempt. The structure was built inside the National Building Museum and took days of steady, nerve-wracking work. The tower grew taller than most rooftops, standing at 33 feet, 2.7 inches, making it the tallest domino tower ever constructed. And then, because it's dominoes, it all came down in seconds. What made this so impressive wasn't just the height. Every layer had to be perfectly balanced. Thousands of dominoes needed to lock together in a way that could support the growing weight without tipping. One misplaced piece and the entire thing would have fallen long before the record was hit. And here's the fun part, they didn't just build it to destroy it. The final toppling was timed perfectly to trigger a mini stuffed animal release, because even record-breaking stunts need some flair. It wasn't just the tallest domino tower ever made, it was the most fragile skyscraper in history. When Lasso Schaller climbed to the top of a cliff in Switzerland, there were no wires, no backups, and no second chances. In front of cameras and a stunned crowd, he jumped from 192 feet straight down into a specially prepared pool of water. That's taller than the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and yes, he survived. The dive lasted just over 3 seconds, but that's 3 seconds of falling at over 75 miles per hour, head first into a pool that had to be deep enough and still enough to absorb the impact without breaking bones. The margin for error was practically zero. Schaller is a trained athlete and canyon jumper, but this was something else entirely. His preparation involved years of practice, calculations, and mental training. You're not just diving from a high board, you're fighting gravity itself. Since then, no one has officially matched or beaten his height. And honestly, most divers don't even try. At that speed, hitting the water is like hitting concrete. 1 degree off angle and the results would be dangerous. But Schaller nailed it perfectly, creating one of the most insane records ever set in the world of extreme sports. Holding a plank for 60 seconds burns. Try 5 minutes and you're in full body survival mode. But Josef Šalek from Czechia held a plank position, back flat, elbows locked, for an impossible 9 hours, 38 minutes, and 47 seconds. No breaks, no collapsing, just pure endurance. The plank is one of the most brutal core exercises out there. It doesn't just work your abs, it punishes your shoulders, your legs, your arms, even your mind. Most people crumble within minutes. Šalek held on for nearly 10 hours. That's longer than some people sleep. During the attempt, he kept calm, focused, and incredibly still. No shifting, no cheating, just constant tension from head to toe. He even smiled during parts of it, though you can bet every second felt like an eternity. This wasn't his first time breaking records either. Šalek trained for months in silence, doing long planks in forests, mountains, and even public squares. When the timer finally stopped, he didn't just set a new bar, he launched it into the stratosphere. To this day, no one has managed to outlast him. You want discipline? This record is discipline. If you've ever seen someone smash a concrete block with their bare hands, you probably thought, okay, that's impressive. Now multiply that by 1,174 times in just 60 seconds, and you're entering the world of Ali Bacitepe. This martial artist from Turkey set the official Guinness World Record for the most concrete blocks broken in a single minute. It wasn't a choreographed performance or some staged event for a show. This was raw speed, power, and precision, repeated over and over with no room for error. The setup? Stacks of blocks lined up like dominoes of destruction. Each time Bacitepe brought his arm down, another pile shattered. Over and over. Every second, about 20 pounds of concrete met its end under his strikes. That's nearly 20 blocks every 5 seconds, without breaks, without flinching. Most fighters trained for accuracy or technique. Bacitepe trained for impact. His punches were so fast and forceful it looked like a blur. And the best part? Every block had to fully break to count. No cracks, no chips, only clean destruction. This record is one of those that's crazy on paper, and even crazier when you see it. Concrete isn't soft. Your arms aren't supposed to move that fast. But Bacitepe made it look almost effortless. That's why no one's been able to top it since. The bar is just too high and probably still covered in dust. There are eating contests, and then there's Joey Chestnut. In 2021, he downed 76 hot dogs with buns in just 10 minutes. No pauses, no slowing down, just non-stop motion. It wasn't just a new record, it was a display of speed, control, and stomach-stretching skill that left the entire competitive eating world stunned. To put it in perspective, that's more than 7 hot dogs per minute, or 1 every 8 seconds, buns included. Try chewing 1 hot dog slowly. Now imagine doing it nearly 80 times with cameras rolling and a clock ticking. Chestnut's technique is unreal. He breaks the hot dogs in half, dips the buns in water to soften them, and uses a rhythmic motion that's been refined over years of competition. And yes, it looks wild, but there's serious strategy behind it. Timing, breathing, jaw endurance, even hydration. He didn't just eat the most hot dogs, he pushed past what most believed the human body could handle in such a short span. This record has stood firm ever since, with Joey still dominating every contest that comes close. Others have tried, some came close, but no one has crossed the 76-dog finish line. This isn't just a crazy number, it's a mountain only one man has climbed, mustard stains and all. Running a mile under 6 minutes is impressive on its own, but doing it backwards? That's next level weird and wonderful. Enter Aaron Yoder, a track coach from Kansas who pulled off something almost nobody believed was possible. He ran a backward mile in just 5 minutes and 54.25 seconds. Yes, backwards, the entire distance. No turning around, no missteps. Just a steady, controlled sprint facing the wrong way around a high school track. Yoder started running in reverse as a way to stay active after injuries made forward running painful. At first, it was just a rehab method. Then he got faster. Then he got really fast. Eventually, his backward pace outclassed most people's forward sprint. What makes this so crazy is how your body fights you the whole time. You can't see where you're going. You lose balance. Your calves burn. Your knees feel it. It's awkward. But Yoder made it smooth, efficient, even graceful. His record isn't just fun trivia. It's an eye-opener into how far you can push human coordination. No one has broken his time. And until someone finds a way to sprint blindfolded at near full speed in reverse without tripping or missing a step, this one's likely staying locked in. Running forward is for the rest of us. Yoder proved that even going backwards, you can still be ahead of everyone. Walking on Lego bricks is a pain most people know all too well. One tiny plastic block underfoot can bring even the toughest adult to their knees. Now picture walking on Legos for 8.9 kilometers. That's over 5.5 miles of pure foot torture. That's exactly what Salik Nib Sonny Molina from the US did when he set the record for the longest barefoot Lego walk ever recorded. The attempt took place on a specially arranged path packed with thousands of Lego pieces. No shoes, no brakes, no soft spots. Every step had to land on the uneven, jagged plastic surface, and every meter counted. This wasn't just a test of pain tolerance, it was a brutal endurance marathon, disguised as a kid's toy disaster. Molina trained for weeks beforehand, slowly increasing his tolerance and adjusting his stride. He had to balance speed with safety and pain with pacing. Medical staff monitored him the entire way to make sure he didn't seriously injure his feet. In the end, he completed the challenge in front of cheering spectators and official witnesses. The record hasn't been touched since, and honestly, who would want to? It's one thing to climb a mountain or run a marathon. But walking barefoot over Lego bricks for nearly 9 kilometers? That's a unique kind of madness, and it earns Molina a spot among the most unforgettable record breakers of all time. There's Headstrong, and then there's Vispi Karate. This Indian martial artist shattered expectations and 24 iron bars using only his forehead. In just 60 seconds, he bent the metal rods one by one, setting the world record for the most iron bars bent with the head in a single minute. Let's be clear, these aren't flimsy wires or stage props. These are thick, solid bars of iron that would normally require tools, machines, or at least a serious upper body effort. But Vispi didn't use arms or legs. He lined up the rods and slammed his forehead into each one with speed, precision, and sheer willpower. Every bar had to bend clearly to count. No partial curves, no breaks in rhythm, and all of it happened in front of a crowd during a live event, with officials watching and time ticking. The sound of metal cracking under his skull was like a drum beat, fast, heavy, and almost surreal. Most people would hesitate just thinking about trying this, but Vispi turned his head into a human battering ram. He didn't just break a record, he redefined what determination looks like when it's wearing a helmet of bone. No one stepped up to beat his mark. It's not just about strength, it's about fearlessness, pain tolerance, and a drive that borders on superhuman. Strength has limits. Muscles give out, bones crack. But somehow Paul Anderson managed to defy every physical expectation in one of the most staggering feats of human power ever recorded. Back in the 1950s, in a modest barn in Georgia, USA, Anderson performed what is still considered the heaviest weight ever lifted by a human being, a jaw-dropping 6,270 pounds, or about 2,840 kilograms. No crowd, no hype, just Anderson, a wooden platform, and a massive load of weight stacked on top. He performed what's known as a backlift, standing beneath the platform with his back and legs braced, then pushing upward using only his legs and hips. It wasn't a flashy lift you'd see in the Olympics, but it was officially recorded, verified, and witnessed by experts. No one has beaten it since, not even close. To put this into perspective, that's the weight of a large pickup truck, lifted off the ground by a single man. The force it takes to do that without injury is hard to calculate. The platform was custom built, the weight evenly distributed, and Anderson's technique was flawless. But make no mistake, this wasn't a gimmick. The man was just that strong. He went on to become an Olympic gold medalist and a legend in the strength community. Even today, with all our advanced training techniques and specialized equipment, nobody's matched that number. Powerlifters, strongmen, and athletes all know his name, and they all agree the record still stands for a reason. Anderson didn't just lift metal, he lifted the ceiling on what we thought a human could do. His record isn't just unbroken, it's untouchable. That's about it. What record could you set? Write in the comments. For more useful information, watch other videos.